Hello chaps and chapesses. Today we're going to talk about Estancia Laguna Verde on Jurassic Lake. Jurassic Lake and Estancia Laguna Verde is a destination that I've always wanted to visit. Just after Christmas, I got my opportunity and got to see what this fantastic destination is all about. Traveling to Argentina is something I've done many times. This time I was traveling to an area of Patagonia that I hadn't been to before. As normal, I flew into Buenos Aires, which is a wonderful city, fantastic places to stay, great food. After spending a night there, I then travelled south to Patagonia to El Calafate. El Calafate is an amazing region. It's known for its mountains, its glaciers and stunning blue lakes. Travelling to El Calafate from Buenos Aires takes roughly 3 hours. It's really quite an easy journey. From here you transfer to Estancia Laguna Verde. On the left hand side of the road as you're driving, you can see the Andes in the background and the famous peaks of Fitzroy and Cerro Torre, which is the Patagonia logo. You drive along the main road for 2.5 hours before turning off onto a track. Most of a track, or at least the first part of a track, is not bad, but there's an hour and a half of fairly rough driving. In total, the journey takes just over 4 hours. On the other side, you've got the world's greatest rainbow trout fishery, so it's more than worth it. On arrival at Estancia Laguna Verde, I was met by the wonderful staff who couldn't have been more welcoming. They showed me to my room straight away, and soon after I was offered a cup of tea, a coffee, or possibly something a little stronger. Not long after that, I met with my guide Esteban. We were going to fish together over the following days, and a quick chat with him gave me an idea of the tackle I needed for the current conditions, flies, leaders, and this gave me the opportunity to set up my kit after having a bite to eat at the lodge. To fish Jurassic Lake, you need, on the whole, a 7-weight is the rod that most of the guides prefer to be used. This is for a number of reasons. The fish are very big. A 5-pound rainbow trout is considered small, and it is a windy destination like many places in Patagonia. On calm days, especially if you're fishing the Barrancoso River, a 6-weight can be useful, but on the whole, a 9-foot to 10-foot 7-weight rod will cover you for most of the fishing that you would do there. When you do have very windy days, a switch rod that's 11 or 11.5 foot long can be very useful, because it means if you've got the wind on your back, you can roll cast it out using the wind to your advantage. And this is a lot easier than trying to form a back cast into a very strong gale. Esteban, my guide, was very quick to note that reels were extremely important. The fish are strong, and a reel with a good drag that's able to hold plenty of backing is important. Your bone fishing reel would be perfect for most of the fishing at Jurassic Lake. On Jurassic Lake, you can use sinking lines, and it is useful to have one, but most of the fishing is done with a floating line. If the guides feel you need to fish deeper, usually they will add a poly leader or sink tip onto your floating line. Although I like using a floating line with a fairly aggressive taper there, I prefer not to use shooting heads. One of the main reasons for this is if I'm fishing a dry fly, I like to be able to pick up quite a lot of line quickly and then reposition the fly. This is difficult with a shooting head because you've got to strip it back to that point where the head starts. When it came to leader material, of course it's worth having a few tapered copolymer leaders, as we might use for much of our trout fishing, but a lot of the time our guides preferred to use straight fluorocarbon. Generally this was in 15 pounds. This might seem heavy, but the fish are big, and even when you fish the river, there's a lot of boulders, it's very rocky, and for this reason they generally preferred fluorocarbon for its abrasion resistance. I would say if you're bringing straight leader material, it's worth bringing 12 pound, 15 pound and 20 pound fluorocarbon. That gives you a lot of flexibility. If you're bringing tapered leaders, I would make sure that the tapered leaders, the point is roughly 2x. There's not much point in fishing lighter. If you need to fish lighter, you can always add thinner material onto the end of this leader. Although the fish are very big in Jurassic Lake and in the Barrancosa River, you might be surprised that a lot of the flies they use are not actually very big, even with streamers. Most of the time they're using streamers that are black or black and purple, often with a hot head. And most of these are rarely much bigger than size 8 or size 6. So we're talking about this kind of size for most of the streamers there. Along with the streamers, they do use a lot of nymphs, and the nymphs are really sizes 12 through to about size 8, but most of the nymphs will be sizes 12 and sizes 10. Along with the nymphs, of course, dries can be important when we're fishing, when the conditions are right, and a lot of the dries are Chernobyl ants. They're quite sizable. Again, we're talking sizes 6, sizes 4 sometimes, and often a Chernobyl ant can work very well because you can suspend a nymph below it. They're very buoyant and they also work very well as an excellent indicator. In terms of nymphs, patterns like copper johns in a range of colours, various hare's ears are all excellent. Often these nymphs will have tungsten beads just to help sink them slightly deeper. The reason why the fish are as large as they are in Largo Strobel or Jurassic Lake is because they have this enormous population of freshwater shrimps or scuds in the lake. There's an unending resource of this food supply and the fish swim around hoovering them up. It's interesting that although this is the main type of food that the fish feed on, especially while in the lake, although shrimp patterns do work, it's often not the most effective pattern for these fish. There's lots of theories to this, but I personally believe that because there's such an abundance of them, general attractor nymphs and streamers tend to stand out from the crowd. You can have good fishing on shrimp patterns, but you're trying to replicate billions of other shrimps. So something that stands out from the crowd often works far better. When it came to fishing the lake, Estancia Laguna Verde has a huge variety of water to fish, from sandy bays through to rocky outcrops, through to points. They've got a lot of water to fish, and all of these areas fish well at different times of the season. The guides will communicate with each other, and between them they will decide which areas they're going to fish. And this always means that you end up seeing a wide variety of water types in the lake and also in the river. When I was there, certainly the first few days, conditions were extremely windy and unusually so for this time of the season. This did restrict us to fishing some of the sandy bays that were downwind. By no means was this a bad thing, as one moment that stood out for me, which was on my first afternoon on the lake, was hooking into the biggest trout I've ever hooked into and landed. It was extraordinary. I was fishing in an area called Monster Bay. My fishing partner Julio, who had been there many times before, he was on the other side of the bay and catching fish and doing well. I had landed one fish that was a lovely 7-pound fish. It was a lovely fish, but at Jurassic Lake it was one of the smaller guys. Casting downwind, as the wind was strong, I had chosen to use my Hardy switch rod and rolling the line out. It was very easy with the wind, and I was stripping a small streamer back slowly. Just one Esteban had gave me, a couple of inches long with a small tungsten head, and this thing slammed the fly, and straight away it was pretty obvious that it was just not another normal trout. I mean, it was not a trout really that I could have caught anywhere else in the world. Took off into the backing, reeled line in, took off into the backing, reeled a little more in, and this went on for 15-20 minutes before Esteban slipped the net under a 17-pound rainbow trout that was in wonderful condition. And unless I go back there, I'd be surprised if I'd ever catch a bigger wild trout in my life. It was unbelievable. One of the aspects of this fishery that I was most excited to fish, and that I'd heard a lot about, was the Barrancoso River. I had heard about this place numerous times. I'd seen videos, and Jurassic Lake is a big lake, but the Barrancoso River is the main spawning stream. I wasn't in there for the prime time to fish the Barrancoso River, which is early and late in the season. So we're talking around November, and then again March, April. There was still plenty of fish in the river though. When it's in its prime, you get these enormous fish swimming up this river, and the river's not big. It's a bouldery, boisterous river, lots of rocks, very well featured, and you get these fish that can be up to 20 pounds stacked up in these small pools, and you can catch them on dries and quite small nymphs and small streamers. When I was there, the water was low, unusually low for this time of the season, or certainly for this season, but all of the pools, or all of the main pools, had fish, and it was just a wonderful experience. You were catching fish that were, when I was there, up to 12 pounds, and the pools were small. The pools were really no bigger than this table, or at least the pockets where the fish were holding, and you were sight fishing them, and the water was very clear. I wish I had my 6 weight, but I just had my 7 weight, and you strike into these fish, and it was a game of cat and mouse, desperately trying to wiggle the line around rocks, trying to make sure they didn't cut you off. It was just a very memorable experience. It was quite bizarre to see fish of that size in the type of river that you would normally reserve for a nice 1 pound brownie. Although it was very windy for the start of my trip, the wind did drop, and this really meant that for a while I was able to see the full extent of the type of water that Estancia Laguna Verde was able to offer. We moved out of the sandy bays that we had been restricted to by that strong wind, and we fished a couple of really amazing areas. Even getting to the water was moonscape. You were walking on these quite bizarre structures, and it really felt like you were walking on a coral bed, and a lot of that was just calcium that had encrusted around the rocks, and it was just the most bizarre landscape. And we fished an area called Tasmania. It was a small bay with quite a deep drop off. Myself and Julio were spaced 30 meters apart. Esteban was perched up high, spotting to see cruising fish, and it really didn't feel like you were fishing in a lake. It felt far more like saltwater fishing, because these rainbows would cruise in on the waves, and you'd often see them on the wave, and then they'd cruise along the edge, and then you'd try and almost sight fish them with small streamers. In a funny kind of way, it reminded me slightly of GT fishing from the cliffs at Astove. It was pretty amazing. Although we caught some nice fish, most of them were on the smaller side, and Esteban decided that although the fishing was good, it could be better. So we walked along the shore for a few hundred meters, and then we went to a series of very small bays, and unlike where we had just been at Tasmania with a steeper small cliff, this was just a series of really quite shallow small bays in an area called Caletas del Moro. And here, honestly, I had the best fishing of the trip. We were fishing nice chubby Chernobyl with a nymph suspended 3 foot behind, 3 or 2 foot. I mean, we really weren't fishing deep. And here we caught a lot of chrome fish. Before travelling to Jurassic Lake, I wasn't completely aware that there are 2 different types of fish there, and I'd picked Esteban's brains about this. He explained to me that there's one type of rainbow that is slightly more resident, quite territorial to its area. They grow very big. Both types of fish grow very big. They're more heavily spotted, they're slightly less chrome, and they don't fight quite as well. This area we were catching chrome fish, and these roam around the lake far more. They'd almost, although we're not in salt water, you'd almost call them more pelagic, and they're just torpedoes, and the difference in fight is substantial. And you hook one of these, and even if it's 7-8 pounds, it will go into the backing, especially if you hook them in shallow water. And the fights are just unbelievable. They jump constantly. Catching these on dries was just unbelievable. And we were catching them in 3 foot of water, not deep at all. Obviously in this shallow water they don't dive down, they go straight out, and you're just watching your reel and the line go and go and go, and they're just extraordinary fish. This session really highlighted what was so special about the fishery. I mean, Julio caught a fish that was fin to fin perfection and was 16.5 pounds. It was just an amazing fish. I've never seen anything like it. It was only this long, but solid muscle, 16.5 pounds. And unfortunately I didn't get to see him fighting the fish. I mean, I was lucky to see it afterwards. It was an extraordinary fish. I mean, I caught another fish, not as big as that, but a 13-pound fish. And the fight was unlike any fight I've had from a fish in freshwater, or certainly a trout in freshwater. I could draw far more parallels between saltwater fishing than the trout fishing I've done before and I'm used to. In addition to the Barrancoso River and Jurassic Lake, or Largo Strobel, Estancia Laguna Verde also has access to numerous small lagoons, one of which is next door to the lake, Laguna Verde, not surprisingly. They don't have the same size of fish as in the lake, but you can still have wonderful fishing for fish up to 10 pounds, both rainbows and browns. When conditions are slightly more tricky, they're a really great way to end the day, because the fishing is a little different. It's a much smaller, more intimate water, and it's just another facet of this amazing fishery. The final evening we returned to the lodge as normal, always greeted by the wonderful staff ready to serve a drink, and we sat and we chatted and we ate homemade empanadas with all of the guides. I mean, I think it'd be rude of me not to mention a little bit about the lodge and the staff and the food, because in addition to the amazing fishing, this really added a little extra to what's quite an extraordinary place. They seem to have got the balance very well between a very comfortable fishing lodge, but one that feels like returning home, and one that's very relaxed. Everyone's very friendly, the food's great but not pretentious, the wine's delicious, and it's just a really pleasant, fun place to come back to after a day of exceptional fishing. To summarise Estancia Laguna Verde and Jurassic Lake is there's really nowhere else like it. I can't think of any other fishery or trout fishery in the world where you can catch these enormous wild rainbow trout on quite small flies, often in quite small areas like intimate pools on the Barrancoso River. You've got access to these amazing small lagoons. The lake is just an extraordinary area with a wide variety of fishing. I mean, there's only one place like it in the world. There's really no other trout fishery. You can draw parallels between Largo Strobel, Jurassic Lake. It is completely unique. And whether you want to catch very big fish or quite a lot of fish, you can do both. It's a very, very special place. As always, I hope you found this video useful, and please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel.